Before we begin, I need to tell you something. The stories you're about to hear are not like typical campfire tales. These accounts come from people who've encountered something that defies explanation. Something ancient. Something that walks on two legs but isn't human. Something the Navajo people call the Yi-Nailed Lushi, the skinwalker. For those unfamiliar, skinwalkers are part of Navajo tradition. They're said to be witches who've gained the ability to transform into animals or take on animal characteristics. But they're not simply shapeshifters. They're humans who've chosen the darkest path possible, performing unspeakable acts to gain their powers. And according to those who know, even speaking about them can draw their attention. Many Navajo people refuse to discuss skinwalkers with outsiders. It's considered dangerous, disrespectful. But over the years, people from all backgrounds have reported encounters with something that matches the descriptions. Something that moves wrong, looks wrong, feels wrong on a primal level that makes every instinct scream danger. Today I'm sharing 12 encounters with what people believe were skinwalkers. These stories come from across the American Southwest and beyond, from the desert landscapes of New Mexico and Arizona to the forests of Colorado and the plains of Oklahoma. From people who had no knowledge of skinwalker legends until after their experiences, and from Native Americans who knew exactly what they were facing. I want to be clear, I'm sharing these stories with respect for the cultures and beliefs involved. These accounts are being presented as told to me, without embellishment or dramatization. Whether you believe in skinwalkers or not, the fear these people experienced was real. The encounters changed them, and their warnings deserve to be heard. So turn up your volume, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for 12 skinwalker encounters that I found on Reddit. Let's begin. Story 1E, the Northern Canada Hunt, posted by user Dark Hunter 789 on r/paranormal encounters. I've been debating on sharing this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there, but I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life. This was late fall of 2010 in northern Canada. I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of our journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of the reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I kind of felt funny, dizzy, or sedated, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees started to morph and move ever so slightly, and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust in the darkness, and along the tree line I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it all, so I started to back away and made my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice and was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here. So I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. It was rotting flesh on knotted bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear had made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped. I gripped and tore the grass, trying to lift myself, and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally, my voice came back, and I yelled that someone has my leg. My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw, and that it looked like my relative but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too. I know that's a Wendigo." He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things or dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this dark figure daily. I went to a medicine man or shaman for help, but I've learned that ceremonies only relieve it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being outdoors, hunting, and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They're real. I can attest to that. Stay safe, everyone. Story 2A, the Alabama state line, posted by user Bradley Mitchell 23 on r/cryptid encounters. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area I grew up in. Be warned, some of this may be too frightening for some. Reader discretion is advised. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and Skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I think I've ever heard about, the Wendigo. A few months ago, after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned the big uproar, I went to go see him since I had been enlisted away in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go up and see him. We were having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his new ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided, why not? So I grabbed my gun, and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had pretty much been forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary, even for me. Curious though, I asked him about it. He said that if you went into the woods and said, Wendigo, 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you have ever seen. Me, calling his bluff, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wish I hadn't. We started walking on this little path that leads deep into the thick woods close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel it's worth noting that it had been raining a lot over the past few days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob, and he dares me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I slowly started to say it. Wendigo, 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 then nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief at the fact that nothing happened. One thing about mine and Jacob's friendship is we loved it when one of us proved the other wrong about something. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was one of the first times I had proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of smack back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me, still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, I immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were just then turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and then shortly after, we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long since I knew something was up. I didn't know what was up at first, but I just knew it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right in between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by the shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and still practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move! Jacob! Move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up, and we both started to sprint down the path back in the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. Jacob. Jacob, come quick. It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me. The The whole time he was screaming, "Bolivia," I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me, it's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground as both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more, "Go, get out of here! Go now!" As I was screaming that, I pulled out my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction from whence it came. Jacob made it to the open end of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of here!" "Come on, hurry." I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing, a good 50 feet, I turned and me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself. The Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bones. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin, a pale white, almost like a vampire's. But the thing I noticed the most about it were the eyes. A vibrant blue. Almost like a lightsaber blue for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough here, I raised my gun and fired at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, he turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same thing. As he passed me, that was my first experience with this so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. Story 3: The Utah Field, posted by user Scared Teen 1997 on r/paranormal. I'm 25, male. I live in Utah, and I'm curious if any of you have seen anything like this before. I'm pretty sure I saw a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy. I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical when it comes to the paranormal. This happened to me when I was 17 and in high school and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door and shared this field as a backyard in a way. I have to explain that his house was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there was supposed to be more houses built down the street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in this cul-de-sac, even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story, though. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while, we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room with the window well to his back porch. It would happen maybe a couple times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. My friend was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive to just vibe. So we hopped in his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked, on all fours, abnormally large, especially its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched onto it. But the part that still sends shivers down my spine is its face. Its jaw hung open to this gaping black mouth, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us. But just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind, into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other and were like, "Did you see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we just saw. We ended up just sitting there in his basement with guns ready and waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again, but we never did. Sorry that it's not very climactic, but it's true. I now don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit there, though. The empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting, even though I can't see it. I can still feel like it's out there. Story 4: The Forest Road Terror, posted by user Terrified Driver on r/let's not meet. Hey everyone. Not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I'm definitely spooked. Also, my very first Reddit post, so sorry if it's a little jumbled. So today my friend, let's call her Ray, and I were in my car at night, windows rolled down and screaming our heads off to loud music. We were feeling absolutely happy, laughing and having a great time overall, while driving around the rich neighborhoods looking at huge mansions. Now, here comes what spooked us majorly. We started getting a little put off because of how dark this road was. Plus, we were going into the middle of a forested area, and everything around us was getting darker and darker. I had to turn on the brights on my car. Now, we still didn't say anything to each other seriously, only joking around, being a little nervous, and getting weird vibes. I made the mistake of turning down a forked road, and immediately we felt sick to our stomachs, both at the same time. I just looked at her, and we both started saying about how something is not right. It was such an urgent feeling of terror, dread, knowing something terrible was going to happen if we stopped the car. We felt like we had to roll the windows up, because we wanted to be safer. Once we finally sped up and started leaving, I felt an intense feeling of something watching us, and I just could not make myself turn to look to my side into the forest, or behind us. The second we got off that road, it felt like a weight came off her shoulders. Again at that same time, I've never felt this terrified before, with such a huge pit in my stomach and sense of dread. What was that, seriously? I have no idea what happened or why we started feeling that way suddenly. I'm so scared. Even just thinking about it gives me goosebumps all over. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Or do you know what it might have been? Story 5 Lee the Minnesota Hunter, posted by user Northwoodsman on r/cryptids. This happened to me last winter while hunting in northern Minnesota. I've been hunting these woods for over 20 years, so I know them like the back of my hand. Or at least I thought I did. It was getting close to dusk, and I was heading back to my truck. The snow was falling pretty heavy, making it hard to see more than 30 feet ahead. That's when I noticed the tracks. They were human, but wrong. The stride was too long, maybe 6 or 7 feet between steps. And the prints were deeper than they should be, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. I followed them for a bit, curiosity getting the better of me. That's when I smelled it. It was like rotting meat mixed with something sour, something that made my stomach turn. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. There was breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing coming from somewhere in the trees ahead. I slowly raised my rifle and clicked off the safety. That's when I saw it standing between 2 pine trees about 40 feet away. It was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and so thin I could see its ribs even through the snow. Its skin was this grayish-white color, stretched tight over its bones. But the worst part was its face. It had a deer skull for a head with antlers, but there were these sunken, hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. We locked eyes for what felt like forever. Then it opened its mouth, and I heard the most horrible sound. It was like screaming and growling all at once. But underneath it all, I could swear I heard words. It sounded like it was saying, "Hungry. So hungry." I didn't wait around to hear more. I fired 2 shots at it and ran. I don't know if I hit it or not. I didn't look back. I just ran through that snow as fast as I could until I reached my truck. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I don't plan to ever go back. Story 60 The Camping Trip Nightmare, posted by user Never Camping Again on r/no sleep my buddies, and I decided to go camping in the Boundary Waters in northern Wisconsin. There were 4 of us, me, Tom, Jake, and Chris. We'd been planning this trip for months, and we were all excited to get away from civilization for a few days. The first 2 days were great. We hiked, fished, and sat around the campfire telling stories. But on the 3rd night, things got weird. We were sitting around the fire when we heard something moving in the woods. It sounded big, like a bear, or maybe a moose. Tom grabbed his flashlight and shined it toward the noise. That's when we saw the eyes. 2 glowing eyes reflecting the light, but they were way too high off the ground to be a bear. They had to be at least 7 feet up. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered. Before anyone could answer, the thing moved. It was fast, impossibly fast for something so big. It circled around our campsite, staying just outside the reach of our firelight. We could hear it breathing, this wet, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. Chris, being the brave idiot he is, grabbed a burning branch from the fire and walked toward where we last saw it. "Come on, show yourself!" he yelled. That's when it stepped into the light. I'll never forget what I saw. It was humanoid, but wrong in every way. Its limbs were too long, its body too thin. Its skin was pale, and seemed to hang off its bones like it was wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, and its face. God, its face. It had human features, but they were all stretched and distorted. Its mouth was full of broken, yellow teeth, and its eyes were black pits. It lunged at Chris, and he dropped the branch and ran. We all ran. We didn't even bother packing up our gear. We just grabbed our car keys and sprinted to the parking lot, which was about a mile away. I could hear that thing chasing us the whole way, crashing through the brush, getting closer and closer. We made it to the car and peeled out of there. When we got to the nearest town, we went straight to the police and told them what happened. They sent a search party out the next morning to retrieve our gear, but they didn't find anything. No creature, no tracks, nothing. But they did find something weird. Our campsite looked like it had been ransacked. Our tents were shredded, our food was scattered everywhere, and there were these strange symbols scratched into the trees around the site. The officer who interviewed us said it was probably just a bear, but I know what I saw. That was no bear. I think we encountered a Wendigo, and I'm never going camping again. Story 70, The Winter Cabin, posted by user Frozen and Afraid on r/paranormal encounters. This happened to me and my girlfriend last February. We rented a cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for a romantic weekend getaway. The cabin was pretty remote, about 10 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but snow and trees. Everything was fine the first night. We made dinner, drank some wine, and watched the snow fall outside. But around midnight, I woke up to a tapping sound on the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch, but the tapping had a rhythm to it, almost like someone was knocking. I got up to check, and when I pulled back the curtain, I nearly had a heart attack. There was a face pressed against the glass. It was pale, almost white, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. But the worst part was the smile. This thing was grinning at me, showing off rows of sharp, broken teeth. I screamed and jumped back, which woke up my girlfriend. She asked what was wrong, but by the time I looked back at the window, the face was gone. I told her what I saw, but she thought I was just having a nightmare. I knew better. The next night, it came back. This time we both saw it. It was standing at the edge of the tree line, just staring at the cabin. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and so thin it looked like it would break in half if the wind blew too hard. It had antlers growing out of its head, like a deer, but its body was definitely human. Or at least, it used to be. We locked all the doors and windows and tried to wait it out. But then we heard scratching on the roof. Long, slow scrapes, like claws dragging across the shingles. My girlfriend wanted to call the police, but there was no cell service out there. The scratching got louder and more frantic. Then we heard it on the walls, and then on the door. Whatever this thing was, it was trying to get in. I grabbed a kitchen knife, the only weapon we had, and stood by the door, ready to defend us. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the scratching stopped. Everything went silent. We waited for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. When the sun finally came up, we packed our stuff and got the hell out of there. We didn't even bother checking out properly. We just left. When we got back to town, we told the guy who rented us the cabin what happened. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, that happens sometimes. We don't usually rent that place out in the winter." I asked him why the hell he rented it to us then, and he just shrugged and said, "You didn't ask." I later did some research and found out that area has a history of Wendigo sightings. I'll never go back to that cabin, and I'll never go camping in the winter again. Story 80, The Highway Encounter, posted by user TruckerTim55 on r/humanoid encounters. I'm a long-haul trucker, and I've driven through every state in the continental US. I've seen a lot of weird stuff on the road, but nothing compares to what I saw in northern Montana last year. It was about 2 a.m., and I was driving on a lonely stretch of highway. There wasn't another car in sight, just me and the road. Then I saw something standing on the shoulder up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a person who needed help. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't either of those things. It was standing on 2 legs, but it was too tall and too thin to be human. Its skin was pale, almost glowing in my headlights, and it had these long, gangly arms that hung down past its knees. I slowed down as I approached, trying to get a better look. That's when it turned its head toward me. It had a face that looked almost human, but the proportions were all wrong. Its eyes were too big, its nose was too flat, and its mouth was stretched into this wide, unnatural grin. I hit the gas and sped past it, but as I did, it lunged toward the truck. I heard a loud thud on the side of the trailer, like it had tried to grab on but missed. I didn't stop to check. I just kept driving until I reached the next truck stop. When I got out to inspect the trailer, I found deep scratch marks on the side, like something with claws had tried to rip its way in. I reported it to the police, but they said it was probably just a bear or a mountain lion. But I know what I saw. That was no animal. I think it was a Wendigo, and I'm just glad I was going fast enough to get away. Story 90, The Park Ranger's Warning, posted by user Ranger Mike83 on r/search and rescue. I've been a park ranger for 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of strange things in the woods. But there's one incident that still haunts me to this day. A few years ago, a family went missing in the national park I work at. They were experienced campers, so it was unusual when they didn't check out on time. We organized a search party and spent 3 days looking for them. On the third day, we found their campsite. It was completely destroyed. The tents were shredded, their supplies were scattered everywhere, and there was blood. A lot of blood. But no bodies. We expanded the search radius, and that's when one of the other rangers found something. About a mile from the campsite, he found a trail of blood leading into a cave. We went in to investigate, and what we found inside will haunt me forever. The family was there, or what was left of them. They'd been torn apart, and it looked like something had been feeding on them. But that's not the worst part. On the wall of the cave, there were symbols carved into the rock. They were old, really old, and they looked Native American in origin. We called in experts to examine the scene, and they confirmed our worst fears. The symbols were warnings. They were meant to keep something in or keep people out. Either way, we'd stumbled onto something we shouldn't have. Since then, I've heard stories from other rangers about similar incidents. Missing hikers, mutilated animals, strange sounds in the night. And every time, there are those same symbols somewhere nearby. I don't know what's out there, but I know it's real, and I know it's hungry. Story Tungi, the ski resort incident posted by user snowboarder2002 on r/glitch in the Matrix last winter. I was snowboarding at a resort in Colorado. It was late afternoon, and most people had already left for the day. I decided to take one more run down a black diamond trail that goes through a heavily wooded area. About halfway down, I wiped out pretty hard and lost one of my gloves. I stopped to look for it and noticed something weird. There were footprints in the snow next to the trail. They looked human, but they were huge, easily size 20 or bigger, and they were barefoot. I followed the prints for a bit and saw they led off the trail and into the woods. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growling sound coming from the trees. I looked up and saw something moving between the pines. It was tall, maybe 9 feet, and it was moving on all fours, but its limbs were way too long for it to be natural. Its skin was pale, almost blue in the fading light, and I could see its ribs sticking out through its skin. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I hopped back on my board and flew down the rest of the trail as fast as I could. When I got to the bottom, I told the ski patrol what I saw, but they just laughed and said I probably saw a bear. But I know what I saw. That was no bear. I think it was a Wendigo, and I'm never going back to that resort. Story 11, The Abandoned Town, posted by user Urban Explorer 99 on r/abandoned porn. I'm an urban explorer, and I love checking out abandoned places. Last year, I heard about an old mining town in northern Nevada that had been abandoned since the 1950s. I decided to check it out. The town was pretty small, just a few buildings and some old houses. Most of them were in bad shape, but there was one house at the end of the main street that looked relatively intact. I decided to go inside. The house was creepy as hell. There were old photos on the walls, furniture covered in dust, and a smell like something had died in there. I was exploring the second floor when I heard a noise downstairs. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I froze and listened. The footsteps got louder, like whoever or whatever it was coming up the stairs. I looked around for a place to hide, but there wasn't anywhere to go, so I just stood there, waiting. The door to the room I was in slowly creaked open, and I saw it. It was tall and thin, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were sunken into its skull, and its mouth was hanging open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It was a Wendigo. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then it took a step toward me, and I snapped out of my trance. I ran past it and down the stairs, not stopping until I was outside. I could hear it behind me, chasing me through the town. I made it to my car and sped off, not looking back. I later found out that the town had been abandoned after several miners went missing under mysterious circumstances. Some people believe it was a Wendigo that drove them away. After what I saw, I believe it too. Story 20 of the Hunting Lodge, posted by user Big Game Hunter on r/Theo. I was on a hunting trip in Alberta, Canada, with a few friends. We were staying at a remote hunting lodge deep in the wilderness. The first few days were great. We saw plenty of game and had a lot of fun. But on the fourth night, something happened that changed everything. We were sitting around the fireplace in the main lodge, drinking and telling stories, when we heard a loud crash outside. It sounded like something had knocked over one of the trash cans. One of my friends, Dave, went outside to check it out. He was gone for a few minutes. and then we heard him scream. We all rushed outside and found him standing in the middle of the yard, staring at the tree line. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed toward the trees and said, "There's something out there. Something big." We all looked where he was pointing, and that's when we saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, about 8 feet off the ground, staring back at us from the darkness. We grabbed our rifles and shined our flashlights toward the eyes, but whatever it was, it disappeared into the woods before we could get a good look. We went back inside and locked all the doors. For the rest of the night, we heard scratching and tapping on the windows. It sounded like something was trying to get in. We didn't sleep at all that night, just sat there with our rifles, waiting for whatever it was to break through. When the sun came up, we packed our stuff and left. We didn't even bother finishing our hunt. We just wanted to get out of there. On the way back to town, we stopped at a gas station and told the attendant what happened. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's the Wendigo. It's been around these parts for years. I've been hunting my whole life, but after that night, I don't think I'll ever go back to that part of Alberta." Thank you for listening to these 12 Wendigo stories from Reddit. Stories from people across North America who encountered something that challenged their understanding of reality. Something that exists in the cold, dark places where civilization hasn't quite reached. These accounts come from different subreddits, different types of people, different circumstances, but they share common threads. The skeletal appearance, the impossible height, the antlers, the hunger, the cold, the ability to mimic voices, the association with winter and isolated places. I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to prove the Wendigo exists. I'm not a cryptozoologist or a paranormal investigator. I'm simply sharing these stories as they were told on Reddit. What you make of them is entirely your choice. But I will say this: the people who shared these stories were sincere. Whether they experienced real supernatural encounters or misinterpreted natural phenomena or created fiction, they put real emotion into their accounts, real trauma, and in some cases, real loss. The Wendigo legend exists for a reason. Like many indigenous traditions and warnings, it contains wisdom. Maybe it's literal wisdom about avoiding actual monsters. Maybe it's metaphorical wisdom about the dangers of isolation, starvation, and crossing moral boundaries. Maybe it's both. Whatever the truth, the warnings deserve respect. Don't venture into deep wilderness alone, especially in winter. Stay with groups, make noise, keep fires burning. Don't respond to strange voices in the darkness. Respect the land and the people who've lived on it for thousands of years. If you're planning to visit or travel through the northern forests of the United States or Canada, do your research. Learn about the areas you're visiting. Listen to local knowledge and warnings. Take proper safety precautions, and understand that you're entering territory that operates by different rules than civilization. The wilderness is beautiful, inspiring, but it's also dangerous. There are natural dangers we all recognize: exposure, predators, accidents. And there may be other dangers. Dangers we don't fully understand. Dangers that exist in the liminal spaces between known and unknown. These 12 stories serve as warnings, from people who've looked into those liminal spaces and seen something looking back. Whether that something was the Wendigo or something else, the fear they experienced was real. And their advice to stay safe, stay together, and stay away from certain places comes from genuine concern. So take these stories for what they are: data points, anecdotes, warnings from fellow humans who've been to the edge of the unknown and lived to tell about it. Learn from their experiences. Take precautions. Respect the wilderness and the warnings that come from those who know it best. The northern forests are vast, ancient, full of beauty and full of mystery. And in the darkest, coldest parts of those forests, something hunts, something hungry, something that was there before us and will be there after us. Whether you call it the Wendigo, or the winter spirit, or simply the unknown. It exists in those spaces beyond firelight, beyond safety, beyond understanding. Stay safe out there, stay together, and remember, if you hear your name called from the darkness, if you see something tall and skeletal watching from the trees, if you feel that bone, deep cold that has nothing to do with weather, don't investigate. Don't approach. Don't try to rationalize. Just leave, as fast as you can. And don't look back. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and stay aware. The world is stranger than we know, and the wilderness holds secrets we may never fully understand. The Wendigo is out there, hunting, waiting, patient as winter itself, and winter always comes.